Have you ever noticed this uh, just incredibly bizarre quirk of the human brain?
Oh, I'm sure I have a few in mind, but which one are we talking about?
Well, think about riding a bicycle. You can confidently hop on a bike, pedal down the street, balance your weight perfectly around a sharp corner, and brake just in time for a stop sign.
Right, yeah, like second nature.
Exactly. You are an absolute master of this machine. You don't even think about it. But, and here's the quirk. If I sat you down in a chair right now, handed you a pen and paper, and asked you to write down the exact step-by-step physical mechanics of how to do it,
Oh, you'd be totally lost.
completely freeze. Like, try writing down how to maintain gyroscopic balance or
Mm.
the exact force required on the pedals to overcome inertia or the micro adjustments happening inside your inner ear.
It's nearly impossible.
You can do it effortlessly, but you struggle to explain it.
It is a universal experience, honestly, and it points to a massive blind spot we have regarding what learning actually looks like under the hood.
Yeah, we really misunderstand it.
We do. We tend to view learning through this very, I don't know, mechanical lens, like downloading a PDF and just saving it to a hard drive.
Like we're computers.
Exactly. We assume that if you know how to do something, the instructions must be written down somewhere inside your head in clear, readable text. But the reality of human cognition is just far messier. It is a dynamic, physical, and highly layered process.
And today, we are decoding that invisible architecture of human thought. Welcome to the deep dive. We're going to explore the mechanics of how human beings take the raw, chaotic noise of the world and basically transform it into mastery.
Which is quite the undertaking.
It is. But we have a great guide for this journey. We are diving into the work of Jerome Bruner, a revolutionary cognitive psychologist who fundamentally changed our understanding of the brain.
A true giant in the field.
The mission here is to extract the core secrets of what is known as constructivist learning theory. We're breaking this down so you can use these blueprints to become, well, a super learner.
I love that.
Whether you are trying to master a complex new coding language at work or trying to teach a teenager how to manage their finances, or simply wanting to understand how your own memory files away information, we are going to look at the underlying code of human cognition.
And when we talk about Jerome Bruner and constructivism, we have to establish immediately that this is not just an academic theory about childhood education.
Right, it's not just for kids.
Not at all. This isn't just about what happens to a third grader learning multiplication. We are talking about the continuous lifelong process of human meaning making.
Like how we understand reality itself.
Exactly. It is about understanding the fundamental mechanics of how anyone, at literally any age, moves from a state of total ignorance to a state of complete mastery, and why certain methods of learning stick permanently while others just vanish overnight.
Which brings up the other classic learning paradox, right? The 3 a.m. cram session.
Oh, we've all been there.
Right. Why is it that you can aggressively memorize 100 vocabulary words the night before a major exam, ace the test the next morning, but by the following Tuesday, that knowledge has completely evaporated?
Like it never existed.
It feels like the brain just dragged those files to the recycle bin and hit empty.
Well, that evaporation happens because cramming treats the brain like a passive storage container. It completely bypasses the natural process of how the mind actually builds long-term understanding.
So it's a structural failure.
Precisely. To understand why cramming fails and why you can't describe how to ride a bike, we really need to look at how the brain actually constructs its reality. And there is perhaps no better starting point than Bruner's own life.
His personal story is wild.
It is, because his personal entry into the world was a profound lesson in how the brain builds perception from scratch.
Yeah, so let's get into that. He was born in New York City in 1915, and the detail that anchors his entire perspective on the world is that he was born blind.
Severe congenital cataracts.
Right. For the first 2 years of his life, he lived in complete darkness. It wasn't until he was 2 years old that he underwent what was, at the time, a very risky corrective surgery to remove the cataracts, and he finally gained his sight.
Just imagine the neurological impact of that.
I can't even fathom it.
I mean, a 2-year-old brain has already spent 24 months mapping its environment entirely through touch, sound, and smell.
Right, the tactile world.
Yeah. Then, suddenly the bandages come off, and a flood of visual data hits the optic nerve.
And he doesn't just automatically know what he's looking at, right?
Exactly. The brain doesn't just automatically know how to see. It doesn't instantly recognize that a specific arrangement of colors and shadows is a chair, or a face, or a window.
It's just noise.
Complete visual noise. William James, the pioneering psychologist, famously described the sensory world of an infant as a blooming, buzzing confusion.
A blooming, buzzing confusion. I like that.
And Bruner experienced that visual explosion at an age where he could actively register the confusion. He had to learn how to interpret depth, how to recognize shapes, how to connect the visual image of his mother to the sound of her voice.
He had to build it.
Yes, he had to actively construct his visual world piece by piece.
He wasn't just handed a fully functioning visual system, he had to build the software to process it.
Which is just a brilliant way to put it.
That seems like the ultimate origin story for someone who would later champion constructivism. Like, it makes perfect sense that he would go on to study at Duke during the Great Depression and then get his PhD at Harvard in the 1940s and basically look at the psychological theories of the day and realize they were entirely wrong.
The contrast between Bruner's lived experience and the academic dogma of the 1940s is just stark. I mean, when he arrived at Harvard, the psychological landscape was completely dominated by behaviorism.
Right, so we're talking about B.F. Skinner.
Skinner, Ivan Pavlov, all those guys. Behaviorism essentially viewed the human mind as a black box.
A black box. Meaning they didn't care what was inside.
Exactly. They argued that you couldn't scientifically study what happens inside the mind like thoughts, emotions, meaning-making, so you shouldn't even try.
That seems so limiting.
It was incredibly limiting. Instead, they focused entirely on observable behavior. You provide a stimulus, you record the response. If you want an organism to learn something, you condition it.
Reward and punishment.
Yes, you reward a behavior to increase it, or you punish a behavior to decrease it.
Like programming a very basic machine. You put a rat in a box, it pushes a lever, it gets a food pellet, it learns to push the lever.
Right.
But the rat isn't thinking deeply about the nature of the lever, you know?
Right.
It's just reacting to the stimulus.
And then that's the problem. Behaviorism treats the learner, whether it's a rat, a dog, or a human student, as an empty vessel. A passive recipient just waiting to be filled with conditioned responses by an expert.
And Bruner just wasn't having it.
He looked at that model and fundamentally rejected it. He argued that human beings are not passive switchboards reacting to stimuli. He introduced what we now call cognitive constructivism.
Okay, so what is the core idea there?
The core tenet is active participation. We are not sponges absorbing water, we are builders.
Builders. I like that image.
When we encounter new experiences, new information, or new sensory data, we actively take that raw material and layer it over our existing mental frameworks. We organize it, we test it, and we build our own internal model of reality.
Okay, so if we are builders, then we need to understand the materials we're building with. We have to look at the actual storage system the brain uses to file away these experiences. If it's not a hard drive with PDF files, what is it?
Well, Bruner proposed that humans process and store knowledge in 3 distinct formats. He called them the 3 modes of representation.
And these were published back in the 60s, right?
Yes, exactly. These are the enactive mode, the iconic mode, and the symbolic mode. And the crucial shift in thinking here is that these are not developmental phases you outgrow.
Wait, really? Because usually with this stuff, it's like stage 1, stage 2, and you move on.
Not with Bruner.
Yeah.
They are the permanent foundational ways the mind organizes information throughout your entire life.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's break down the first one, the enactive mode.
Yeah.
So this is the primary way we learn from birth to about 1 year old.
Right.
And it is entirely action-based knowledge. Muscle memory. Picture a baby learning to shake a rattle.
A classic example.
The baby does not have a mental image of a rattle, and they certainly don't have the vocabulary word rattle. They just have the physical, neurological memory of moving their arm in a specific trajectory and hearing a satisfying sound.
The knowledge of the rattle is stored entirely within the muscle movement itself.
So thinking is doing.
In the enactive mode, yes. Thinking is doing. The cognition is bound to the physical action. You learn by interacting with the environment, not by internal reflection.
And this highlights a massive philosophical departure from Jerome Piaget, right? Another giant of developmental psychology.
Oh, a huge departure. Piaget proposed very rigid, age-related stages of development. In his view, you conquer a developmental stage, you graduate from it, and you move into the next, more advanced stage, leaving the childish ways behind.
Like climbing a ladder and kicking away the rung.
Exactly. But Bruner argued the complete opposite. He stated that these modes are integrated and cumulative. We never leave the enactive mode behind.
And we rely on it constantly as adults. Like if you know how to touch type on a keyboard or sew a button on a shirt or operate a manual lawnmower, you are using enactive storage.
Absolutely.
If someone stops you and asks, Where's the key on a standard QWERTY keyboard? You probably can't instantly picture it in your mind.
No, I'd have to wiggle my fingers.
Yes, if you wiggle your right middle finger, your hand knows exactly where it is. You don't possess a mental photograph of the keyboard, your fingers possess the spatial map.
That is knowledge stored as action, and it perfectly explains the bicycle paradox we started with.
Oh, right, the bike.
Your understanding of gyroscopic balance and pedal force is encoded inactively in your motor cortex and your cerebellum. It is not stored in words or pictures.
So when someone forces you to sit in a chair and explain how to ride a bike, they are demanding that you take deeply embedded enactive knowledge and translate it into a symbolic language-based format.
And the translation fails, because the knowledge literally exists in the doing.
That is wild. Okay, so if the first layer of the storage system is physical action, the second layer moves us inward. The second mode is the iconic mode.
Yes, the iconic mode, which typically dominates human learning from about age 1 to age 6.
And iconic refers to image-based knowledge.
Correct. In this mode, the brain develops the capacity to store information as sensory images or icons. This is predominantly visual, like holding a picture of a dog in your mind even when the dog has left the room. But it also applies to storing the memory of a specific smell, a melody, or the texture of sandpaper.
So they aren't just limited to the present moment anymore.
Exactly. The major evolutionary leap here is that the child is no longer bound entirely to the immediate physical present. They can hold a representation of an object in their mind. They can begin to compare and contrast things without physically holding them.
And this explains why visual aids are so critical. And again, not just for children. Think about an adult trying to assemble a piece of complex, flat-pack furniture, like IKEA.
Oh, the IKEA test.
Right. If the instruction manual only contained text like, imagine just said, attach the tertiary wooden dowel to the anterior side panel at a 45-degree angle, you would be hopelessly lost.
I wouldn't even try.
The language is too abstract for the physical task. You desperately need the iconic mode. You need that little exploded view diagram showing exactly how the pieces fit together.
We revert to the iconic mode the moment abstract language fails to convey spatial reality.
It's a lifesaver.
The visual representation acts as a bridge. It connects the physical reality of the wooden boards, the enactive realm, to the abstract goal of the finished bookshelf. It is a vital translation layer.
Okay, so we have physical action, then mental images. What's the third?
The ultimate cognitive leap. The mode that defines human intelligence is the third tier, the symbolic mode.
And this kicks in around age 7.
Typically, it begins to take the reins around age 7 and then expands infinitely throughout adulthood. In the symbolic stage, knowledge is stored primarily as language, mathematical equations, or other complex abstract systems like musical notation.
But the defining characteristic of a symbol is that it is completely arbitrary.
Entirely arbitrary.
A symbol does not look, sound, or feel like the thing it represents. Take the word beauty. The letters B-E-A-U-T-Y are just meaningless squiggles of ink on a page or pixels on a screen.
The word itself is not inherently beautiful.
Exactly. It is an arbitrary code that society has collectively agreed will represent a highly complex abstract concept.
And that arbitrary nature is precisely what makes the symbolic mode so unimaginably powerful, because symbols are divorced from physical reality. Unlike the enactive mode's muscle movements or the iconic mode's literal pictures, the mind is no longer constrained by the physical laws of the universe.
So you can think about things that aren't real yet.
Yes, you can manipulate symbols to imagine scenarios that have never existed. You can use algebra to calculate the trajectory of a rocket before you ever build it. You can write a fantasy novel. You can debate the ethics of artificial intelligence.
It's like a simulation.
The symbolic mode allows the brain to simulate reality without having to physically enact it.
Okay, I have an analogy for this.
Yeah.
If you are a software engineer listening to this, you are probably realizing that this 3-tiered system maps perfectly onto how we build computers.
Oh, let's hear this.
Think about it. The enactive mode is the physical hardware. It is the actual tapping of the keys, the clicking of the mouse, the physical electrical currents moving through the silicon chips.
Yeah.
It is pure physical action.
Okay, yeah.
Then the iconic mode is the graphic user interface, the GUI. It is the little picture of a manila folder on your desktop or the icon of a trash can. The computer doesn't literally have a paper folder inside it, but that visual image helps the human interact with the system.
It bridges the gap.
Exactly. And finally, the symbolic mode is the underlying source code. The binary, the Python, the C+++A. It is entirely abstract, entirely symbolic, but it is the invisible logic that actually dictates how the entire machine operates.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it.
It fits so well.
It does. And the most important takeaway from that analogy is that a functional computer requires all three layers to operate seamlessly. You cannot run a program without the underlying hardware, and a normal user cannot navigate the code without the visual interface.
So effective learning requires moving fluently between these modes.
Yes. When you encounter a highly complex new topic, the most efficient way to build a permanent mental model is to follow that evolutionary progression. Start with the enactive physical experience, translate it into an iconic visual representation, and finally codify it into symbolic abstract language.
Start hands-on, move to the visual, and graduate to the abstract. But I want to zoom in on that final layer, the symbolic mode, because the ultimate code we run on as human beings is language.
It absolutely is.
And this goes far beyond just communicating with each other. We are talking about how language fundamentally shapes the architecture inside our own minds.
Language is the primary operating system of the symbolic mode. It is the mechanism that allows us to break free from the immediate present. Bruner published a book in 1957 with a title that perfectly encapsulates his entire philosophy: Going Beyond the Information Given.
Going beyond the information given.
Right. Language is what allows us to take the raw, limited data in front of us and reason hypothetically, synthesize new ideas, and project into the future.
Which plunges us right into one of the most fascinating concepts in cognitive science, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, also known as linguistic
A
relativity.
huge topic.
Huge. This is the premise that the specific language you speak doesn't just express your thoughts. It actually dictates how you are capable of perceiving the world. Language is the lens.
The subtle, pervasive influence of linguistic relativity is incredible when you start looking for it.
Give me an example.
Consider how different cultures conceptualize the abstract concept of time. English speakers intuitively map time horizontally. We say we are looking forward to the weekend, or we need to put a bad experience behind us.
Right, like a timeline moving left to right or front to back.
Exactly. Our physical gestures even match this horizontal plane when we talk about the past or the future.
It is a road we are walking down. We can see what is ahead, and we leave things behind.
Now, contrast that with Mandarin speakers, who frequently conceptualize time vertically.
Vertically, like up and down.
Yes. They use linguistic phrasing that translates to the next month is down, or refer to last week as the week above.
Wow.
And this isn't just a quirky translation difference. Cognitive studies show that these linguistic habits physically alter how people process information.
Really? How so?
When given spatial sorting tasks related to chronological events, Mandarin speakers are faster at processing vertical arrangements, while English speakers are faster at horizontal ones. The language has physically guided the neural pathways of their spatial reasoning.
That is mind-blowing, and we see this everywhere with metaphors, too. We constantly use metaphors to take something concrete and use it to build a mental framework for something totally intangible.
Metaphors are the workhorses of the mind.
They really are. The classic example is how we talk about time in terms of currency. We say time is money. We talk about spending time, wasting time, investing time, or borrowing time.
We treat it like a tangible resource.
Right. We have literally structured our cognitive understanding of an invisible dimension time around the very concrete and active concept of handing over coins and dollar bills.
Metaphor is the pinnacle of symbolic thought because it allows us to grasp the ungraspable. It hijacks an existing, well-understood mental framework like money and maps a complex, unknown concept onto it.
But this profound reliance on language brings up a massive chicken or the egg debate that defined much of Bruner's career.
Oh, the causality debate.
Let's dig into that because it's a huge distinction. Does language merely describe our cognitive development, meaning as the brain naturally matures and gets smarter, it just acquires a larger vocabulary to label what it already understands? Or does language actually cause our cognitive development? Is it the actual hammer and nails that build the intelligence?
For Bruner, language is emphatically the cause.
The cause.
It is the engine of cognitive growth, not just the exhaust. He vehemently disagreed with the passive notion that a child's brain naturally ripens into abstract thought, and then they conveniently learn the words to express it.
Like waiting for a fruit to ripen.
Right. He argued that the act of acquiring language, of wrestling with complex symbolic structures, is the very mechanism that pulls our cognitive abilities upward. The words provide the mental hooks that allow us to grasp higher-level concepts.
Wait, if language isn't just a byproduct of intelligence, but the actual tool that builds the brain, then that means we aren't at the mercy of biology.
Exactly.
We don't have to just sit around waiting for a child's brain, or adult's brain for that matter, to naturally mature before they can understand something complex. We have agency in this process.
Exactly the right deduction. And this leads us to one of Bruner's most empowering and, at the time, highly controversial ideas, the concept of manufacturing readiness.
Manufacturing readiness.
Yes. This is where he drew a massive line in the sand against traditional educational dogma. Jean Piaget championed the idea of biological readiness. Piaget's framework suggested that you literally cannot teach a complex, abstract concept to a child until their brain has crossed a specific, predetermined biological threshold.
It is the waiting room theory of human potential. You just sit in the waiting room until the biological clock chimes, and then the doctor says, okay, your brain is now capable of understanding fractions. Until that bell rings, don't even bother trying.
And Bruner found that incredibly limiting and fundamentally wrong. He countered with a radical proposition. Any subject can be taught effectively in some intellectually honest form to any child at any stage of development.
That is an incredibly bold claim. Any subject to anyone at any age.
It is bold, but he believed we do not passively wait for readiness. We actively manufacture it. We create the conditions for the brain to grasp the material.
But how do you actually do that? How do you manufacture a state of readiness in a human brain?
Well, Bruner outlined 3 essential ingredients that must be cultivated. First, there is cognitive readiness.
Okay, meaning what?
The learner has to be mentally prepared to search for underlying patterns and connections rather than just bracing themselves to memorize a list of isolated facts. They have to be in a pattern-seeking mode.
Got it. And the second?
Second, and perhaps most crucially, is motivational readiness.
Oh, motivation is huge.
Motivation is the gatekeeper of learning. If a learner is bored, the brain literally does not allocate the neurochemical resources required to build new neural pathways.
It just shuts off.
Exactly. Conversely, if the learner is terrified or completely overwhelmed by the complexity, the amygdala triggers a stress response that entirely shuts down the prefrontal cortex, which is where complex learning happens.
So you have to find the sweet spot.
Yes, motivational readiness means guiding the learner into that precise sweet spot, often kind of the zone of proximal development, where the challenge is stimulating but not paralyzing. They have to care about solving the problem.
And that ties directly into the third ingredient, curiosity and exploration.
The active desire to know.
Right. The learner must have an active desire to seek out the missing information. There is a psychological concept called the information gap theory of curiosity.
Oh, that's a great concept.
When we realize there is a gap between what we know and what we want to know, it creates a feeling of cognitive deprivation, almost like an itch.
And a ready learner is actively trying to scratch that itch.
Yes, rather than just sitting back and waiting for the teacher to apply the ointment.
Well said. If you can synthesize those 3 elements, pattern-seeking cognition, intrinsic motivation, and active curiosity, you have successfully manufactured readiness. You have prepared the soil.
So once the soil is ready, you can plant incredibly sophisticated concepts, provided you use the right architectural structure to deliver them.
And Bruner's blueprint for this delivery system is called the spiral curriculum, which he introduced in 1960.
The spiral curriculum. It's such an elegant, logical solution to the way humans actually form memories.
It really is.
The foundational idea is that instead of teaching a subject once, testing the student, and then abandoning that topic forever, you identify the core fundamental principles of a field, and you revisit them repeatedly.
You loop back over the same ground.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But every single time the spiral loops back around, you introduce the concept at a slightly higher level of complexity and abstraction.
You are continually building upon the existing mental framework, reinforcing the foundation while adding new floors to the building.
Can we give an example? Let's talk about history.
History is a perfect example. Consider how we teach history. In a flawed, linear curriculum, a school might teach the entire American Civil Rights Movement in the 11th grade. The students memorize dates, pass a multiple-choice test in May, and by September, the details are gone.
Because the neural pathways were never used again.
Exactly. But in a spiral curriculum, you introduce the core concept of civil rights much earlier. Perhaps in the 1st or 2nd grade, using highly relatable foundational concepts like fairness, sharing, and basic classroom rules.
Then, in 5th grade, the spiral loops back. Now the students explore civil rights through the lens of specific historical figures and basic events. The foundation of fairness is already there, so they attach these historical narratives to it.
Right. And in 8th grade, it spirals again. And now they're analyzing the sociological impact of these movements.
Yeah.
They're comparing the U.S. movement to global events like apartheid in South Africa.
And by 12th grade, when the spiral returns, they are diving into the dense, symbolic complexity of the topic. They are analyzing Supreme Court jurisprudence, debating constitutional law, and drafting proposals for modern human rights policies.
The core subject, civil rights, has remained constant, but the cognitive depth has spiraled upward exponentially with each pass.
You see the exact same architecture in mathematics, too. And this is where the spiral curriculum integrates perfectly with Bruner's 3 modes of representation.
Oh, absolutely. The integration is seamless.
Like in kindergarten, the spiral introduces addition enactively. Children physically push 2 wooden blocks together with 3 wooden blocks and count them with their fingers. It is pure physical action.
Inactive mode.
Then in 3rd grade, the spiral returns to addition, but now it is iconic. They are looking at visual diagrams of fractions or pie charts.
Iconic mode.
And in 8th grade, the spiral hits the symbolic mode. They are using algebraic variables to represent unknown quantities. It is the exact same fundamental concept combining values, but it is spiraling up through the modes of human cognition.
The underlying psychological mechanism making the spiral curriculum so effective relies on retrieval practice and spaced repetition.
Which is the opposite of cramming.
Complete opposite. When you cram for a test at 3 a.m., you are holding information temporarily in your working memory and perhaps forming very weak short-term links in the hippocampus.
But they don't last.
No, they degrade quickly. But when you are forced to recall information you haven't thought about in months, when the spiral comes back around, that act of retrieval is cognitively difficult.
It takes effort.
Yes. That mental friction of struggling to remember is the exact biological trigger that tells the brain, this information is important, we keep needing it. The brain responds by myelinating those neural pathways, making the connections faster, stronger, and permanent.
This is why the spiral curriculum is the ultimate antidote to the cram and forget culture. If you are an adult trying to learn a new language, like Spanish, on an app, and you just breeze through Module 1. Greetings. Get your little confetti animation and never review greetings again.
Those neural pathways will wither and die.
Exactly. To actually achieve fluency, you have to intentionally engineer your own spiral. You have to force yourself to circle back to basic greetings a month later. But this time, you add a layer of complexity. You study the difference between formal and informal tenses, or you learn regional slang. You have to actively rebuild the pathway.
That realization that mastery requires intentional, repeated engagement with increasing difficulty is the hallmark of an autonomous learner.
But there is a crucial caveat here.
Always a caveat.
When the spiral loops back, the learner cannot just sit passively while a teacher delivers a slightly more advanced lecture. The learner must be the one doing the heavy cognitive lifting.
Which brings us to the centerpiece of Bruner's educational philosophy and also his most fiercely debated concept, discovery learning.
Discovery learning. This is the principle that human beings internalize knowledge most profoundly when they are forced to find things out for themselves.
Yes. Instead of an expert standing at the front of a room and dispensing the final polished answers, the learners are thrown into a scenario where they have to explore, manipulate data, ask questions, and organically uncover the underlying rules.
They have to discover the solution before anyone provides them with direct instruction.
It demands massive cognitive friction. The learner is tasked with finding the hidden relationships between isolated facts, synthesizing them to see the bigger picture.
And in the 1960s, this idea was incredibly disruptive, wasn't it?
Very disruptive. It stood in direct opposition to the theories of another prominent educational psychologist named David Ausubel. Ausubel was the staunch defender of what he termed expository teaching.
Expository teaching, which is essentially what most of us experienced in school, is the lecture model.
Right. Ausubel argued that the most effective logical way to teach is for the expert, who already understands the architecture of the topic, to organize the information clearly, strip away the confusing noise, and present it directly to the learner.
And Ausubel's primary argument was efficiency, right?
Exactly. Efficiency. Why on earth would you force a student to stumble around in the dark for 3 hours trying to discover a scientific principle when a skilled teacher could clearly articulate that exact principle in 15 minutes?
Expository teaching values the rapid, organized transmission of facts.
But Bruner countered that expository teaching, which we often colloquially call being spoon-fed, might be highly efficient in the short term, but the knowledge is brittle.
It doesn't survive over time.
No, it shatters easily. Think about how these two methods play out in a high school geometry class trying to learn the Pythagorean theorem.
Okay, let's play this out. Under Ausubel's expository method, the teacher walks in, writes a squared plus b squared equals c squared on the whiteboard, clearly defines what the variables mean, works through 2 examples on the board, and then hands out a worksheet.
It is incredibly efficient. Within 10 minutes, the entire room is executing the math.
But under Bruner's discovery learning model, the teacher doesn't utter the word Pythagoras. The equation is nowhere to be seen.
So what happens instead?
Instead, the teacher hands out physical cutouts of various right-angled triangles to small groups of students, along with rulers and grid paper. The prompt is simple. Measure the lengths of all 3 sides for every triangle, record the data, and try to find a mathematical rule that applies to all of them.
And chaos ensues.
Complete chaos. The students struggle. They formulate wrong hypotheses. They get frustrated. They argue with their group members.
But eventually.
Eventually, after intense mental effort, someone realizes that if you square the lengths of the 2 shorter sides and add them together, the sum perfectly matches the square of the longest side. They have organically discovered the theorem.
And you see this in science classes, too. Instead of a teacher lecturing for an hour about the factors that cause an ecosystem to collapse, the teacher hands the students massive spreadsheets of raw data regarding a local lake.
Water temperatures, algae bloom rates, fish population counts over 5 years.
Exactly. The students have to sift through the noise, graph the data themselves, and discover the correlative relationships that explain why the feature dying.
To understand why Bruner believed this frustrating, time-consuming process was superior, we have to look at the psychological mechanics he detailed in his 1961 paper, The Act of Discovery.
Yes, the mechanics of the struggle. When a teacher simply hands you a polished fact, like an equation, it sits loosely on the surface of your memory. You haven't done any structural work to integrate it.
He's just sitting there.
But when you are forced to grapple with raw data, when you form a hypothesis, test it, fail, adjust it, and finally experience that aha moment of recognizing the pattern, that intense cognitive friction physically alters your mental framework.
It alters your schemata. And think of a schema like the mental filing cabinet where you organize your understanding of the world.
A great visualization.
When you are just handed a fact, you just toss a loose piece of paper into the cabinet. It easily gets lost or thrown out.
Yeah.
But when you struggle through discovery learning, the friction of the struggle forces you to actually dismantle and rebuild the filing cabinet itself to make room for this new, profound understanding.
Precisely. The struggle is the binding agent. Ausubel is entirely correct that discovery learning is vastly more time-consuming, but Bruner's counterargument is that the time spent guarantees actual, enduring comprehension.
The knowledge becomes a permanent part of the learner's cognitive architecture because they built it themselves. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. This is the exact moment where I have to play devil's advocate. Because when I hear pure discovery learning, alarm bells go off.
Oh, I know exactly what you're going to say.
Think about trying to learn something highly complex and dangerous, like how to rebuild a car engine or how to write complex server-side code.
Right.
If you just drop me in a garage with a pile of wrenches and a disassembled engine and say, go ahead, be a little scientist, let the friction rebuild your schemata.
You're not going to discover internal combustion.
I am going to stare at it for 20 minutes, feel a rising sense of intense anxiety, probably break a spark plug, and then I'm going to quit and go watch television.
Yeah, you'd be miserable.
Isn't pure discovery learning just abandoning people to thrash around in the dark?
Your reaction is completely justified, and it highlights the most common and most dangerous misinterpretation of Bruner's entire philosophy.
So he didn't want us thrashing.
No, Bruner was not an anarchist. He never advocated for abandoning learners in a room and hoping magic happens. He understood human psychology perfectly well. He knew that unguided, pure discovery leads directly to cognitive overload, crushing frustration, and learned helplessness.
A learner hitting a brick wall over and over again does not build a schema. It just builds resentment.
Thank goodness, because the idea of pure discovery sounds exhausting.
It is, which is exactly why Bruner introduced what is arguably his most brilliant, most enduring, and most practical contribution to the world of education and leadership. He introduced a mechanism to save discovery learning from collapsing into chaos.
And what is that?
Scaffolding.
Scaffolding. The concept was formally introduced in a seminal 1976 paper co-authored by David Wood, Jerome Bruner, and Gail Ross.
And how do they define it?
Scaffolding is defined as the temporary, highly structured support provided by an expert, a teacher, a manager, a parent, or a peer that enables a learner to master a task or solve a problem that is just slightly beyond their current independent capabilities.
The metaphor is so perfect it immediately makes sense. Think about watching a skyscraper being built in a city.
Okay, picture the construction site.
The scaffolding is the intricate lattice of metal pipes erected around the exterior. The scaffolding is not the building itself. It is a temporary framework that supports the workers, gives them a safe platform to stand on, and allows them to place the bricks where they need to go.
And crucially, as the brick wall becomes self-supporting, the construction crew doesn't leave the scaffolding up forever. They slowly dismantle it, piece by piece, dropping it down a level until the building can stand entirely on its own against the wind. that physical process is exactly what must happen psychologically. The expert must build a temporary cognitive framework around the learner. And Wood, Bruner, and Ross didn't just leave this as a vague metaphor about helping people.
No, they got very specific.
They rigorously broke down the psychology of scaffolding into 6 highly specific functions. These are the exact behavioral levers an expert must pull to guide discovery without ruining it.
If you manage a team, or if you are trying to teach your kids anything, these 6 functions are a masterclass in human development. Let's walk through them.
Let's do it. Function number 1 is recruitment.
Recruitment. So this is step 0. You cannot scaffold someone who refuses to look at the building.
Exactly. The mentor has to get the learner interested in the task, highlight its relevance, and make sure they actually understand what the end goal is. You have to capture their attention and their motivation.
Function number 2 is perhaps the most critical for preventing that feeling of thrashing in the dark. Reducing degrees of freedom.
What does that look like in practice?
Well, when a novice faces a complex problem, they are paralyzed by the infinite number of possible actions they could take. It is the paradox of choice. The mentor's job is to eliminate the irrelevant directions, close off the dead ends, and narrow the scope of the problem.
You reduce the number of variables the learner has to juggle.
Yes, you don't give them the answer, but you drastically shrink the sandbox they have to play in, focusing their energy on a productive path rather than blind trial and error.
Function 3 is direction maintenance. Learning a complex skill takes time, and motivation naturally wanes. The mentor has to keep the learner pushing forward.
So keeping them on track.
Exactly. This usually involves taking the massive, intimidating final goal and chunking it down into smaller, achievable subtasks. You keep their eyes focused on just the very next step, preventing them from getting overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the mountain.
Function 4 is marking critical features. A novice doesn't know the difference between signal and noise. They don't know what details matter.
They're just overwhelmed by data.
Right. The expert acts as a spotlight, pointing out relevant concepts and, crucially, highlighting errors. The expert does not fix the error for them, that would be expository spoon-feeding, but they mark the error. They say, look closely at this specific joint right here, forcing the learner to evaluate it themselves.
Function 5 is frustration control. This is the emotional intelligence aspect of scaffolding.
Managing the meltdowns.
Precisely. The mentor monitors the learner's affective filter. When the cognitive friction gets too hot, when the amygdala is about to hijack the brain and make the learner quit, the mentor steps in to lower the temperature. They provide encouragement, validate the struggle, and perhaps temporarily lower the difficulty to rebuild confidence.
And finally, function 6 is demonstration, providing models for imitation. If the learner is truly deeply stuck, no amount of encouragement will help.
You have to step in.
The expert must step in and demonstrate a partial solution or model the physical action, giving the learner a foothold to grab onto so they can resume climbing.
To really see how these 6 functions interlock in the real world, let's look at an incredibly vivid case study of a college-level construction and framing course.
Oh, this is a great example. Taught by an instructor named Mr. Reynolds.
It is a perfect demonstration of moving adults from guided support to total independence.
Okay, so the way Mr. Reynolds opens his course is pure Bruner. He doesn't start day 1 by passing out a syllabus and lecturing for 2 hours on the mathematical principles of load-bearing walls and weight distribution.
No, he starts with an active discovery.
Yes. He sets up a series of pre-built, freestanding wall frames in the middle of the shop floor. Some of them are built flawlessly. Others contain intentional critical flaws, studs spaced too far apart, missing headers, incorrect nail patterns.
And what does he tell the students to do?
He gathers them and simply asks, which of these frames looks the strongest and why? And he doesn't just let them look. He tells them to physically push on the frames.
Enactive mode in full effect.
He tells them to apply lateral force. The students physically lean into the wood. They feel the poorly built frames wobble, groan, and buckle under their weight, while the correctly built frames hold solid.
They're actively discovering the principles of structural integrity through their own muscles before he ever hands them a blueprint.
That covers recruitment and the initial discovery phase. But then the students have to actually build a wall themselves.
This is where the scaffolding is erected. In the beginning, Mr. Reynolds provides heavy, explicit support.
Right. He doesn't just hand them a saw.
No, he demonstrates how to properly measure the lumber, how to use the speed square to mark a perfect 90-degree angle, and how to safely operate the pneumatic nail gun. He is utilizing function 6, demonstration. He is modeling the correct behavior so they have a baseline.
But the moment the students break into teams and begin assembling their own frames, his behavior fundamentally changes. The scaffolding begins to shift. He stops providing answers and starts managing the environment.
Like a true guide.
When he walks around the shop and sees a team about to make a critical mistake, he doesn't jump in and say, "Stop, you forgot to secure the header over that window."
Because that would be doing the thinking for them.
Exactly. Instead, he uses function 4, marking critical features. He points to the window opening and asks, "What do you need to check regarding load distribution before you secure that section?"
He forces them to engage their symbolic mode, their reasoning and language, to evaluate their enactive physical work.
And inevitably, things go wrong. A team miscalculates a measurement, they cut a board too short, or a frame doesn't sit square. The tension rises, the students get frustrated.
Enter frustration control and direction maintenance.
He doesn't take the saw from their hands and fix the cut. He asks, "Okay, the measurement is off. What is your immediate next step to correct this?" How would a professional framing crew approach this exact problem on a job site?
I love that detail. How would a professional approach this?
He is elevating their cognitive state. He is treating them as competent builders, which forces them to adopt that persona.
If you're listening to this right now, think about how you approach leadership or parenting.
It applies perfectly.
When you are onboarding a new employee to a complex software system or teaching a teenager how to parallel park, you cannot just hand them the keys and walk away. That is pure discovery, and it ends in a crash.
But you also cannot sit in the passenger seat and grab the steering wheel for them. That is expository teaching, and they learn nothing.
You have to build the scaffolding. You reduce the degrees of freedom by taking them to an empty parking lot first. You mark critical features by asking, where should your mirrors be aligned right now?
You manage their frustration when they hit the cone. And slowly, as their competence rises, you talk less. You pull the bolts out of the scaffolding piece by piece until they are driving the car entirely on their own.
It is the ultimate balancing act of human development. You must provide precisely enough support to prevent catastrophic failure, but not 1 ounce more, so that you do not accidentally steal the cognitive friction required for discovery.
It is a beautiful framework. Now, as we expand our view in the final act of this deep dive, it's important to recognize that Bruner was not the only architect working on these blueprints.
That's true, there was some healthy debate.
There is a fascinating philosophical showdown between Bruner and another titanic figure in constructivist psychology, Lev Vygotsky.
Ah, yes. Bruner and Vygotsky are the two pillars of constructivism. They both completely agreed that learners actively build their own knowledge, and they both heavily championed the absolute necessity of scaffolding.
Didn't Vygotsky invent the zone of proximal development?
He did. In fact, Vygotsky coined the term zone of proximal development, which is the exact psychological space where scaffolding operates. But they have a profound fundamental divergence in where they place the center of gravity in the learning process.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Vygotsky's theory is fundamentally sociocultural. He believed that the human mind is entirely socially derived. To Vygotsky, learning does not happen in isolation inside the brain. It happens in the space between people.
The space between people.
Yes. The primary engine of cognitive development is the interaction with a more knowledgeable other, a mentor, a parent, a peer within a specific cultural context. The culture and the mentor provide the tools of thought, and the learner internalizes them.
Bruner, on the other hand, fully acknowledged the vital role of the mentor, hence his obsession with scaffolding. But he placed the ultimate center of gravity inside the learner's own internal active struggle with the material.
The mentor sets the stage, but the learner is the one who must conduct the experiment and have the internal aha moment.
There is a brilliant metaphor often used to contrast these two worldviews. Imagine the goal of learning is to sail a boat across a treacherous sea to reach a distant port of mastery.
I love this metaphor.
If you ask Vygotsky how to get to the port, Vygotsky would say that the absolute most critical element is the skilled pilot standing next to you at the helm. You need the mentor to guide you through the specific cultural currents, to teach you the language of the sea, and to navigate the socially constructed waterways. The interaction with the pilot is the journey.
But if you ask Bruner, he would argue that while having a skilled pilot is certainly helpful for avoiding the rocks, the student's primary and ultimate job is to learn how to read the maps, understand the stars, and calculate the currents themselves.
The mentor is just temporary scaffolding. The internal navigation is the actual goal.
Vygotsky views the learner primarily as a little apprentice, absorbing the vast cultural knowledge of the society around them. Bruner views the learner primarily as a little scientist, actively experimenting on the fabric of reality to discover its underlying laws.
It is a subtle difference, but it fundamentally changes how you view human independence and potential. And we see similar philosophical clashes when we bring Bruner's ideas into the modern era.
Yes, his work really hits the reality of the modern world.
He published his seminal works in the 60s and 70s. How does this architecture hold up in our current world? There are massive strengths, and also some glaring friction points.
The strengths of Bruner's model are more visible today than ever, particularly when you look at how we teach advanced STEM fields: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
Right, it's very hands-on now.
The modern push toward project-based learning, inquiry-based science labs, and flipped classrooms is pure, unadulterated Bruner. We are finally moving away from the Victorian model of rows of desks listening to a lecture and moving toward the laboratory model, where students are given raw data, a complex problem, and the scaffolding to construct the theories themselves.
But the friction point is massive, and it's something every educator and student feels constantly. The standardized testing apparatus.
Oh, the tests.
Bruner's entire philosophy of discovery learning, the spiral curriculum, the messy process of trial and error, requires time. It requires flexibility. It requires a high tolerance for nonlinear progress, where a student might be confused for 3 days before having a breakthrough.
You cannot easily implement that in an educational system that demands highly specific, measurable regurgitation on a standardized Scantron bubble sheet every May.
It just doesn't fit.
That is the enduring tragedy of modern education. Discovery learning values deep, permanent structural comprehension. Standardized systems value efficient, uniform, short-term memorization.
Ausubel's expository teaching wins out in a system optimized for testing because it is faster.
Furthermore, there is a valid critique that Bruner's model assumes a baseline of intrinsic motivation that simply isn't present in every learner for every subject. It assumes everyone wants to be a little scientist, which ignores the reality of human apathy.
Which is why that first function of scaffolding recruitment is so incredibly difficult.
Getting them to care is half the battle.
So, what does this all mean for us today? When I think about how we overcome these limitations of time and individualized attention, my mind immediately jumps to the technology reshaping our world right now.
Artificial intelligence.
Exactly. It seems to me that Bruner's theories from the mid-20th century pair flawlessly with modern AI and adaptive learning technologies. In fact, AI might be the ultimate constructivist machine.
Explain how you see that connection. How does an LLM or adaptive software fit into this?
Think about the fundamental limitation of a human teacher. You have one teacher in a classroom of 30 students. It is mathematically and physically impossible for that single human being to provide perfectly personalized scaffolding for 30 different brains simultaneously.
True, they can't clone themselves.
They cannot reduce the degrees of freedom exactly the right amount for student A, while perfectly managing the frustration of student B and marking the critical features for student C all in the same minute. The teacher has to teach to the middle.
But an adaptive AI learning platform doesn't have that limitation.
It has infinite patience and perfectly tracks the individual. It can monitor exactly where a specific student is struggling. If the student makes an error, the AI doesn't just give the answer. It offers a tailored hint that is function 4, marking critical features.
If the student is overwhelmed, it dynamically reduces the complexity of the next problem, function 2, reducing degrees of freedom.
If the student hits a wall, it provides a step-by-step model, solution function 6, demonstration. It scales Bruner's highly personalized scaffolding to the individual level for millions of people simultaneously.
That is a profound realization. Technology, when it is explicitly designed with constructivist principles, ceases to be just a digital textbook. It becomes a dynamic, responsive mentor.
It democratizes the elite experience of having a personal tutor who perfectly adjusts the cognitive load based on your real-time neurological needs. It guides the discovery process without short-circuiting it.
It is absolutely mind-blowing to think that a psychological theory developed over 60 years ago is essentially providing the architectural blueprint for how 21st century artificial intelligence should interact with human cognition.
It speaks to the enduring fundamental truth of Bruner's insights. He didn't just study how schools operate. He studied how human beings build the world inside their own minds.
He mapped the human code.
So, to synthesize this incredible journey, we started by examining the very materials of thought. We saw how the brain stores knowledge, evolving from the purely physical, muscle-bound memory of the enactive mode, transitioning to the visual mapping of the iconic mode, and finally unlocking the infinite, abstract power of the symbolic mode.
We explored the astonishing reality that the language we speak isn't just a way to express our thoughts, but the very scaffolding that builds our cognitive capacity.
We dismantled the passive waiting room of biological readiness, proving that with the right mix of cognition, motivation, and curiosity, we can actively manufacture a learner's ability to grasp the unknown.
We analyzed the elegant architecture of the spiral curriculum, the necessity of repeatedly returning to foundational concepts at ever-increasing levels of complexity, proving once and for all that cramming is a biological dead end.
We championed the difficult, frustrating work of discovery learning, recognizing that the mental friction of figuring it out for yourself is the only thing that alters your schemata and makes knowledge permanent.
And most importantly, we examined the art of scaffolding. We learned that pure discovery is a recipe for chaos, and that true teaching, true leadership, and true parenting is about providing a temporary, highly specific framework of support that slowly, deliberately fades away as the learner achieves independence.
We are builders, not sponges. We are actively constructing our reality every single day. But before we sign off, there's one final, somewhat provocative thought I want to leave you with, building on our discussion about technology.
Bruner proved to us that the struggle of discovery, that intense mental friction, that uncomfortable momentary frustration of not knowing the answer and having to connect the dots yourself, is the exact mechanism that reshapes our stomata. The struggle is what makes knowledge permanent.
But today, we live in a world of instant, frictionless search results. We carry devices in our pockets equipped with AI that can instantly summarize complex articles, solve advanced equations, and provide the correct answer in milliseconds.
If we constantly use technology to completely eliminate the friction of discovery, to instantly bypass the struggle, are we accidentally dismantling our own cognitive scaffolding?
By making the acquisition of facts entirely effortless, are we losing the fundamental human ability to learn how to learn?
If the AI does all the heavy lifting to build the filing cabinet, do we ever actually own the knowledge inside it?
If you never have to struggle to balance the bike yourself, do you ever really learn how to ride? It is a question we all have to answer for ourselves. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take these blueprints, look closely at how you are learning, look at how you are guiding others, and go actively construct your day.